I was in the boat of, honestly, I was scared to talk to people. I was scared to have those kind of conversations. I wasn't the guy that was real bold in my witness or in my looking for conversations. I wasn't intentional in any of that stuff. And the conviction that God brought to me was Romans 1:16, which most of us might know what that is. Those of us that don't, it's Paul saying in Romans, it says that, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God to save the Jew," anyone who believes, first the Jew and then the Greek. And so anyone that believes, it's the power of the gospel itself that does the saving. And what I was convicted of from that verse is that I was ashamed of the gospel. And as a Christian, I grew up in a Christian home. I grew up in a Christian church. I've been churched my entire life. And that was hard. That was a hard pill for me to swallow. That I was actually, the root of my heart was, I really don't want to tell people about Jesus because I don't want to be rejected. I don't want people to not think I'm cool or not think I'm mature or respectable or you name it. So the insecurity in me was I want to be liked. I don't like confrontation, actually. And so that was the root for me that God revealed about my heart, that I was actually more concerned with what people thought of me than what I think God thought of me. And in that, I wrestled really with, why am I so ashamed? And in the process of all this, as I started working with Brian Catherman, who's the lead pastor at Redeeming Life Church, he was very bold in his witness, and he brought me along with him, and he was discipling me, still is to this day, mentoring, coaching, discipling, all these things, and modeling for me what it looks like to live a normal life in everyday places and to be intentional with those everyday things for the sake of the kingdom. And he really stretched me. He would say, "Hey, there's some people walking over there. Let's just go chat with them." And I'm like, "Oh, I'm going to go sit in the car."
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not joking. And he's probably listening to this laughing because he remembers that moment. Or we go to a restaurant and he put a gospel tract down on the table, and I would just almost want to crawl under the table and hide, because if I knew if somebody saw that, I was going to be embarrassed, thinking, "Oh, they're going to think we're just crazy Christian people," and all this kind of stuff. Or even worse, he would ask the waitress how we could pray for him right then and there on the spot, and I wanted to crawl under the table. That's who I was 2 years ago, because I was so unashamed. I was so ashamed, honestly, of the gospel itself and the power that it has to convict people. Now, so today, God's done a lot of work in my heart where now I can confidently say I feel ashamed when I miss opportunities. I feel ashamed when I miss those opportunities, knowing now, because I've been trying to grow in that. And there's days that I miss opportunities. I'm not perfect. I am not special. I'm not a super spiritual person. Like, I do think, Ben, that this is an issue that applies to every Christian. I think if you're a disciple of Jesus, Jesus gave the Great Commission to every disciple, and he said, "I want you to go, and I want you to make disciples as you're going in the everyday stuff of life and teach people about Jesus. And as the gospel does the hard work, convicting, convincing, bringing about belief, all these things, our job is to walk with people in that and point them to Jesus." And so, honestly, it was just a lot of self-examination is where it started, and realizing that I knew what the Bible said, but I was actually not living what the Bible said, and I was ashamed of the gospel because of my own insecurities and not wanting to be controversial, and I want to be liked. I mean, I like to be liked. I like people. And so for me, I had to get over my own personal insecurities of not being liked or not being accepted, because ultimately at the end of the day, Jesus being lifted high and the gospel being proclaimed has to be more important than my reputation on earth. And so that for me was my issue. And I think we all probably have a different angle on this issue of why don't we do these things. But I think another piece of it might be that we read stories in the Bible and we see these great guys like Paul and Stephen and Acts, and we read the book of Acts and we're like, this is amazing stuff, man. Those guys were super, super Christian people. And I think it's a terrible tragedy if we read it and that's the takeaway from that story, because they're normal dudes. Nowhere in the story do you see that God said these were special, awesome people that had special, awesome, amazing lives that were doing things that no one else can do. We don't see that. That's not the truth of the gospel. Elijah was a man just like us. And those kinds of things, and look what he did for God. And so the bigger thing for me is obedience. You know, are we willing to be obedient when we hear the voice from God? Are we already set in our ways, saying, even if I hear from him, I'm not going to do that? And that was me. And so that's a long answer to your question, but I think there's a lot of layers in that issue of why don't we do this? You know,
we were talking about that a couple weeks ago, actually, about like somewhere along the line, we've convinced ourselves that people don't want to hear good news.
I agree.
When inherently, good news is good news. people want to hear it. It's been mentioned. It's good.
And actually, I want to chime in on that too, because Luke 10:2 says the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. And it hit me one day, in the same time that I was processing the same stuff. The harvest is plentiful, meaning people that need to know and believe the gospel, people that will be saved, God that is whatever your theological background is, there are people that God is prepared to bring to salvation. We don't know who they are. It's not our job to save them, but the harvest, he said, is plentiful. And in the Gospel of John, he said, lift up your eyes and see that the fields are ripe for harvest. The issue is not the harvest. The issue is not enough laborers willing to go and reap the harvest. And that blew my mind when I had that distinction that we sit in here, and I agree with you, man. We say, we live in such a secular day. No one wants to hear this anymore. But the timeless truth of God's word says it is. It says there's plenty of people that want to know.
Right.
The issue is not, are there people that want to hear? Are there people that are going to get saved? That's not the issue. The issue is there's not enough Christians willing to be obedient enough to open their mouth and say something. And that started with me first. So don't hear any condemnation from me because that was my issue. But I think that's a huge distinction.
No, I agree. I think we spend a lot of time, even as Christians, going, "Hey, the world sucks," and the right answer is get a rake.
Right.
Right. Like
Right.
God created the rake. He knows how the field works.
Yeah.
We have this. Mike's right. We have this implicit thing that says people don't want good news, and frankly, I think from our being disengaged in that arena, we also don't think it just doesn't have power. Right? Like if we really believe that the gospel is what changes people, like it has the power to transform lives, and we obviously know people whose lives could use a little transformation, and we simply don't believe that it will do it.
Yep.
Right? Because if the thing is that it doesn't even make sense from a rational perspective, the thing that is at risk versus the thing that you are to gain, you would always share the gospel, right?
Yeah.
This is the thing you would always say, because of if we love people the way that we claim to love people and we want their best, it's just we wouldn't deny them the gospel, right? But like the only reason I wouldn't go share something like that is because I don't actually believe A, that is good news to them, and B, that it does actually do what it does.
Yep.
And like when those things are missing, okay, then I understand our hesitancy, but because like the nature of being scared just simply doesn't make any sense if you know Jesus. The nature of people, yes, someone will reject it. It doesn't mean that it's good. Like it's a crazy person that rejects good news like that.
Right.
And so I have to be like, well, pray for the crazy guy. He's not taking in stuff, right?
Yeah.
Right. So. Obviously, that like wording probably could have chosen it differently, but like in general, what I'm saying is that like I think we miss a lot of it because we don't. I'm hesitant that we actually believe that it does anything.